Well, welcome everyone to Readvolution Vol.2, our second webinar discussing the topic of reading. Today we are joined by Robert Poole, you might recognize from our previous webinar on oracy, and Baron Dane Delbert-Jones, who will both share some key takeaways in how they engage young learners with reading. So as always, this session will be recorded and shared online and via email after. By attending, you are consenting to this. A Q&A will take place at the end of the session, so please type your questions in the chat throughout the webinar and we'll look to answer them in the Q&A at the end of the session. Everyone who attends this webinar will receive a CPD certificate. This will be sent via email tomorrow, along with a recording of the webinar. So, our first webinar on reading was a hit with teachers. That's why we're back at it again. We found out 31% of students are indifferent to reading and 15% dislike it. Therefore, this webinar will act as a sequel to our first edition and will focus on practical ideas to get that percentage of students to fall in love with reading, which I think is safe to say is a shared goal amongst all of us here, both on the panel and the audience attending. So first, allow me to quickly introduce our guests, Robert and Baron. So firstly, Robert. Robert Poole is a qualified English teacher and head of PSHCE at Sharpeville School. He is also editor of Education for Tomorrow, the Journal of Progressive Education. He was voted a Big Issue Top 100 Changemaker in 2022 and awarded the Ron Todd Foundation Award for Social Justice in 2023. Now let me introduce Baron. Baron is the librarian and extended learning coordinator at Piper's Corner School of Buckinghamshire. He has worked in school libraries for the last 11 years, something he feels incredibly privileged to have done. In that time, three key aspects of school libraries have been his focus: how they develop information literacy, critical thinking and research skills, how they foster whole school well-being, and how they instill a culture of and love for reading. Welcome, Robert and Baron. Baron, so happy to have you here. And maybe, Robert, let's start with you. What would you like to share with our audience about how you approach the topic of reading with your students? Over to you.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me back. It's a privilege to be here. Something I always enjoy doing is talking to other teachers about my experiences. So with reading, looking at the results from the poll that we got, some, maybe you could say worrying statistics, but they do reflect what we would, we have seen sort of in the wider society from polls, and it's not a new thing. There's often blame on technology that, students are reading less because they're on the phones all the time, but a decline in the amount people read is something which has been happening, over a number of years, before phones, and there's always something to blame for it. And to me, it's about how do we get this love of reading? I mean, have you ever thought about how amazing reading is? You probably thought about it at an abstract level. You know reading is important, but look at these black squiggles on a piece of white paper or on a screen, and it can transport us to a different space, a different time. It can make us laugh, it can make us cry, and every emotion in between. In the grand scheme of things, reading is relatively a new invention, a new skill that humans have developed. Humans have been around for 300,000 years, but reading is probably only about 6,000 years old. But why do we place so much importance on it then for our young people? As well as educators, we know the importance of reading in day-to-day life. To be able to read allows us to take part in all aspects of civic society, in the arts and culture, in the economy, etc. And to be able to read is a high-stakes thing now. It's only been around for 6,000 years, but it's something we could no longer live without. It means the difference between getting a job or perhaps ending up in prison. 50% of adults in UK prisons are illiterate. It can mean the difference between, can you choose the right medicine for your child from a shelf? Then why for our young people is reading not seen as a top priority? For some, it's something they actively do not enjoy doing, when we know it's so important. And we tell pupils all the time, tell our own children how important reading is, but they still don't seem to get it. And maybe the way that we're framing it is part of this problem. For full disclosure, a lot of the information that I'm going to give you today, it's not my own research, it's not my own thoughts, and a lot of it comes from a book that I was recommended by Dan Willingham, which a lot of you may have heard of already, and the book's called The Reading Mind. I'd recommend anyone to read it. parents, teachers, librarians, or anyone just interested. It unpicks a lot of the motivations behind reading, the science behind reading. And it's not to say that the cognitive sort of side is the only way of looking at this. We've got to also consider socioeconomic factors that are built into that, which I'm not really going to go into much today, but I just wanted to sort of make clear there are other aspects to this. So what makes a good reader? We know that a strong reader has a broad vocabulary, good comprehension, and motivation to read. And why are people then not a good reader? Why do people become not good readers? So this could be to do with, like I say, the socioeconomic side of it. How often we read, our thoughts, our opinions on reading are influenced by the people around us, our relationships to them. And we know that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds read less for enjoyment than children from more privileged social classes. And this is for a variety of reasons: chaotic home lives, busy households, parents who aren't available due to working multiple jobs. But if we sort of focus on the cognitive side of it, if we break down the challenges of encouraging them to read, we can look at three broad aspects. One, do they have the technical skills and knowledge to actually read the words in front of them? Number two, do they have the broad knowledge of the world around them to make sure they can make sense of those words if they can decode them? And then do they have the motivation, most of all, to actually sit down and read a book for pleasure? And all these are all interlinked, of course, and it's a feedback loop of a sort. If you can't decode the words, you can't enjoy reading, and therefore you read less. If you read less, you don't get the broad knowledge of the world, and you can't understand what you're reading. And it means they've got less motivation to read because you don't understand it, you can't decode it, and so on and so forth. So if we start with the first aspect about the technical skills to decode it. Now, there's a lot of criticism about phonics, but having two young children of my own and having to learn phonics for myself, I think it's had a tremendous impact on improving the ability of children to decode the words in front of them. I read to my son at night, and sometimes there's words I struggle on, and he's 8 years old. He'll take the book off me and he'll go, "Let me have a look at that, Dad." He'll go, "That's a split digraph. I'll break that down for you." And it's fantastic. Something that when I was at school, we weren't taught to do. It was more memorizing words. So I think there's definitely positive things there. But there's also an aspect to consider. Spending long lessons teaching children to decode things in a rather technical way maybe has an impact on the motivation of children to then read for pleasure at other times. But then we know that strong readers need to understand the sounds and spellings and meanings of words. So again, it's finding these a lot of that I'm going to discuss. It's about finding the balance between these contradictions. Do they have a broad knowledge of the world? Was my second point. Now, they must understand the world around them to be able to understand the context of what's going on, the background knowledge, the things that aren't said in a novel or in a news article. Does our young people's knowledge of the world, does it extend beyond their home life, their hometown, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat? Where are they getting this knowledge from? Is it the books then we are giving them? And then we've got to question, if we're giving children books, are they engaging them? Do they fit in with their lived experience? The government likes to talk a lot about cultural capital. And, there's a lot of well-intentioned ideas here, exposing pupils to what they call the best that has been thought and said. But in reality, this could be then narrowing the curriculum to the based around the best that have been thought and said by a very narrow group of people, usually middle and upper class white men. And then if we reflect on the books that we teach, maybe at GCSE, maybe in class, I think we're getting a lot better at this, but, there's still a big focus on, Charles Dickens, John Steinbeck, some fantastic writers, but is there the breadth and the depth of the knowledge being exposed to them? Now, the National Literacy Trust suggests that one tactic for improving literacy is to use a child's influence and their interests to make reading more relevant to them. And they point out this doesn't just have to be fiction. We often focus a lot on novels, short stories, plays, but non-fiction is just as important as fiction. And research shows that boys, especially at secondary school, read more for information than for enjoyment. And if they know where to find that information, how to find that information, we know that's a vital life skill for our pupils. And then they can then deploy that language in their curriculum areas, and this will help some of the progress in their attainment. So how can we make that reading more relevant to their beliefs, their desires, their interests? Now, I'm a big fan of the day, which if you were on my last webinar, you'll probably know. And one, a fantastic way is to use the day. So what I would do in class is we put the day up on the board in the morning. We're lucky enough to have half an hour of tutor time in the morning, and I let them choose what they want to read. Sometimes it would be on the board, but it could easily be printed out, given, it could be paired reading, individual reading. But then we know that talking about the reading and writing, all these things are intrinsically linked in the learning process. And oracy plays a massive role in literacy development, which was why I was talking about it in the last session. And we know that using, again, from the National Literacy Trust, age-appropriate news resources regularly in class increases comprehension skills and improves attitudes toward reading in general. So, as head of PSHE, one thing I'm really keen on making sure happens is that current affairs are firmly embedded in our curriculum at school. Within the curriculum sessions, we'll get the day, and the day is a brilliant resource for building literacy and also critical thinking, which is something else I'm very interested in. And it's designed to be unbiased. It's designed to be written at age-appropriate level, without dumbing down, without being patronizing. You can switch reading ages depending on your class. And fantastic thing, the Beeline reader, which uses color gradients to help people read, I think is fantastic. And I wish I could put that on my Kindle, it's really helps me read, and I'm sure it'll make a lot of difference to pupils. The day starts and ends with these debate questions. And I think an important part of reading is building up this dialogue around reading. Reading shouldn't just be something that you do on your own. If you've ever read a book, you've ever read a news article, the first thing you want to do is go and talk to your friends or your colleagues or your parents about how, about this article. Yet in class, we sort of tended to say, sit down, read in silence, and that's it. It's an individual process where it should be a collective process. And that's why the day is really good, because we have they help pupils to find their voice. We have these debate questions. We can ask them, we can pick up misconceptions. We can ask them to expand on their ideas, ask them why, ask them, bounce the ideas around the room. And this leads us on to, again, all of these things are obviously linked, but the motivation to read for pleasure. We know that children at primary schools read for approximately 30 minutes per day. But then if we go to secondary school, the average is 6 minutes per day. Now, that's an average, which means that a lot are reading a lot less than 6 minutes a day. Some are reading none. Some will be reading more, and that's fantastic. So how do we increase this motivation to read that seems to get lost? And it can be broken down into a couple of categories. There's the expectation for success. Can I do it? Am I going to be able to do this? And the second one is, what's the value of this? Why am I doing this? Why would I want to read? Now, the temptation is to go for rewards and go for praise. And it might seem counterintuitive, but the research would say that we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't go for rewards and we shouldn't go for praise. Now, or at least we should reconsider how we do this, the format it takes. So we want pupils to read for pleasure. So we want them, because we know that if you read for pleasure, they end up doing better at school. We can tell pupils that reading is important, and parents who tell children that reading is important, the children might read more, but they don't do as well as the pupils whose parents tell them, just read because it's fun. The reward should be the reading itself. If we give out rewards, reward points, vouchers, tokens, whatever it is, class dojos, we're telling the pupils that this is not a fun activity and you must be bribed if you're going to do it. Rewards increase the amount of reading done, so we will see an uptick in the amount of reading that takes place, but the motivation around reading for pleasure will actually decrease. And again, praise is similar. My son, for example, he loves reading, but he also loves playing Minecraft. Now, he sits down at my computer and plays Minecraft for an hour. I don't sit there and tell him how well he's done at playing Minecraft. You've done a fantastic job there, because I understand that's a fun activity for him to do. But if he sat down for an hour and read, I'd be over the moon. I'd be praising him. Oh, fantastic. You sat and read for an hour. That's amazing. Well done for reading. But again, what's the message I'm giving him there? The message is reading is something not fun Reading is something that I didn't expect you to do. So instead of thinking about praise and rewards, think about what you do if you're in a book club, or what would you do if you're in the staff room and you saw an adult reading a book or finishing a book? What would you say to them? You'd ask them, how was the book? What was it about? Have you read any more by them? Is there a sequel? What are you going to read next? Have those conversations about it. Now, we want to encourage people to read more, but we need to make sure that the reading that they do is seen as pleasurable. We don't want to make it a chore, and we definitely don't want to use it as a punishment. And I've seen teachers, and I must admit, I've done this myself in the past. Everyone, you're being too noisy. Stop what you're doing. Get your reading books out. Silent reading. And they're sat there reading in silence or pretending to read in silence. Again, we're sending the wrong message, aren't we? So I know everyone wants some sort of practical ideas. So these are from the research I did. These are what I picked out as being some of the most useful ones. Now, has anyone ever told you to sit down and read in silence for 20 minutes? I sometimes wish that someone would tell me to sit down and read in silence for 20 minutes and not distract me. And maybe take my phone away so I'm not distracted. But we need to set out a significant amount of time for pupils to read for pleasure. And the research shows that they need about 20 minutes to actually get into the book that they're reading. Now, if you can carve out 20 minutes in your curriculum time for pupils to sit down and read, we know that this will increase their reading for pleasure. If everyone in the class is sat down reading, it's very difficult for them to get distracted and do something else. If there's nothing else for them to do, then the reading will be the one thing that is there available for them to do. Again, this comes back to like the Minecraft example. My son loves reading. He loves Minecraft. If I give him the option, he's going to choose the Minecraft. He's going to choose the iPad. He's going to choose the computer. Doesn't mean he doesn't enjoy reading, but it has to be the best option. And sometimes the best option is to make sure it's the only option. When they are reading, we should allow people to choose what they want to read. Now, this can be sort of frustrating sometimes when we sort of see the books are picking up, but the focus should be at first on getting the hunger before we get the taste. Open their minds up to the idea of reading for pleasure before we can then start guiding them maybe in the most appropriate way. And of course, if we are getting pupils to read in our classes, there should be some teacher guidance. Otherwise, silent reading time is going to end up as silent where's Wally time, where the pupils perhaps aren't picking the most appropriate books. But we know that, graphic novels, the vocabulary in graphic novels is often fantastic, and they can get a lot from it. So we shouldn't perhaps be snobbish about what they're reading at the same time. So if we have got this silent reading, the teachers should be using this time and actively teaching. Pupils are sat in silence, 20 minutes reading. It's a good opportunity to get some marking done. I'll catch up, I'll send those emails. But we know that actually with silent reading in classroom, if it's done like that, it probably won't have the impact. It might even have a negative impact. So what we want to do is make sure that teachers are using this time well. It could be modeling reading. That perhaps should be a part of it. But more importantly is making sure those pupils are reading the right books, challenging books for them, but at the right level for them, a range of different books. Now, this can be quite difficult. You might be teaching hundreds of different children across different age groups and getting to know them. But having those conversations around the books with them is so important. Find time to talk to them about their books. Give them the opportunity to feel like there's a sense of community in your classroom, in your school, around reading. And that means as well, don't mix up reading for pleasure and academic reading. Pupils are put off with reading because we give them, here's a book to research for this. Here's an extract of a book. Pick out this for this comprehension activity. They need to know that, academic reading can be difficult. Academic reading does not follow the same format. It's about skimming, scanning, selecting quotes as pleasurable reading. So finding time, explaining to them, we're going to sit down and read this. Don't tell them it's boring. They won't, but this is academic reading. This is a different sort of reading to reading for pleasure. Making sure they understand this.
And Robert, just on that point, just because that's a really good point about distinguishing between academic reading and the pleasure of reading, I was wondering just Baron's thoughts on that. As a librarian, we have an audience filled with librarians and teachers as well. I'd love to get your insight on that, Baron, and what you think.
Well, sure. I mean, firstly, I just want to say to Robert, I mean, so much of what you're saying is resonating, and you've hit on so many things that in library circles, these are the hot topics. These are the things that we talk about. Some of the key words that you've mentioned there, this idea of culture of reading. I love that phrase, the hunger before the taste. It's a lovely way of framing it. And that idea that reading should be this thing that allows you to engage with a community of readers. I think that's often something that's missed. We tend to sort of isolate the idea of reading and talk about it as this sort of self-contained thing. We all have an idea of what reading is. And that's the thing that we're delivering to pupils. And if they just did more of it, everything would be okay. I tend to disagree a little bit with that. I tend to push back. I think you're right. I think pupils or young people will read more when they experience a sense of connection when they're doing it. That's what's leading them to alternatives a lot of the time. Yes, there are other things that might come in. Difficulty with reading sort of compounds itself, and eventually you develop a resistance to that experience. But if you can break it down and make it seamless, if you can sort of guide people through, if you can show that this is just something that we're doing, it's not putting the extra vegetables on the plate and say these are good for you, eat more of these vegetables, but actually just imply that actually this is what we're all doing, and the benefits will be there for you to see, and don't make too much of a big deal of it. I mean, it's very difficult and counterintuitive. We tend to think in terms of reading initiatives, which we all do. I mean, absolutely. In our day-to-day, there's no harm in it, and you have to cast a wide net, right? Some young people will need different things to achieve that same result. It can't be one silver bullet will solve this. You have to keep thinking on your toes. But for those that are particularly resistant, I think you're right. I think give them that feeling of success, of connection, and then the key, obviously, and this will pop up again, I'm sure, in a moment when we start talking about opportunities. Without the opportunities to read, they're not going to get there. So carving out that space. I've worked in schools where those opportunities are there. I've worked in schools where, for one reason or another, sometimes very valid reasons, they couldn't provide that time for those young people. But the incentives are there. I mean, if they can get people 20 minutes, you say absolutely. Sometimes the first 5 minutes are a nightmare. Trying to see young people try and sit down and get to grips that it takes 5 minutes to get into a book. We all know this. If you can give them more than 20 minutes, brilliant. But just creating that environment where actually this is fine. This is normalized, is what we're doing. That's definitely a win. Going back to your point, Matt, sorry, because I didn't actually answer your question. And you're talking about the difference maybe between nonfiction reading and this is more controversial, I guess, because on the one hand it's nonfiction, and on the other hand it's reading for pleasure. I happen to think you can get a lot of pleasure from reading nonfiction as well. And this feeds back into, I suppose, my third point after the community and opportunity. It's meeting young people where interests lie. Sometimes you're not selling reading; you're selling an opportunity to validate your interest, to dive a little bit deep into something that's maybe at the back of your mind. I mean, the core quality that we want is a little bit of curiosity, right? If they're curious, then there's a better chance that they're going to at least want to try something out. They might not read Origin of the Species from cover to cover, but they might read an extract, tasters, little snippets. You mentioned TikTok earlier, and yes, attention span is definitely something that we want to maybe address, but it's gently, I think, is the right approach, especially again for reluctant readers. If we can provide a bit of a smorgasbord of things to try, nonfiction and fiction, different formats. I think you mentioned graphic novels, which I love. I mean, if you're a particularly artistic child, all of a sudden the imagery conveys the story. I mean, I often say to young people who come to me and say, I don't like reading. So I say, you don't have to love reading, but love stories, or be interested, depending on what the context is. And as soon as that happens, as soon as you break down here's your vegetables, these are good for you, then they tend to relax a little bit. What are you interested in? Okay. And part of the role of the librarian, I guess, but whoever finds themselves in that situation where you have a young person asking about what to read or what to do next, we do have to be creative. We have to think about all the weapons in the armory. So whether that's through things like role-playing games. I mean, that's something that we run in our library. We have a Dungeons and Dragons club, which is incredibly popular. There's a love of narrative there. Off the back of that, young people have taken out the DM's handbook on the various creatures that one can be. And yes, it's not necessarily going to get them a particular grade in one of their exams down the line, but it might have sparked that little bit of interest where they realize a book is not a scary thing, a magazine is not a scary thing, a story is not a scary thing. There are lots of ways to approach reading, and it's not just that one thing that we have in our mind. So I think flexibility when it comes to meeting with the reader or the potential reader is key. I mean, magazines, games, you name it. Whatever you can get into the space where they would be doing that reading is superb. We'll get onto sort of the role that the day plays at some stage, I'm sure. But I think again, there's a great opportunity to interact with current events. Again, these are things that they would have heard in the background at home, maybe don't know much about it. All of a sudden, if you can bring up the day on a screen, if you have one, they're so accessible. There are the reading levels that you mentioned. The feature that I particularly enjoy is the fact that you can actually set them off on a task and say, pick a topic, type in a topic, up pops a story related to that topic. Suddenly there's a win. They need to feel their success. There's that feeling of success is the thing we want to replicate. And as soon as you do that, then they come back. Then they'll come back and they'll want to know more, and they'll trust you. And from there, it becomes a much easier task to face, I think. Sorry, long-winded response to quite a nice, succinct question, Matt.
No, that's really interesting. I think, I mean, just this idea of shifting the focus from the reading to are you interested in stories? I think that's a really critical takeaway, just to think of it, of how do we present it to young learners, and just by changing it up like that could make a real difference. And I think something else, Baron, that you said that really resonated, this idea of being flexible. I think I'm quoting you on that word, this idea of what constitutes reading. It can be everything, nonfiction, fiction, it can be any type, it could be online, it can be in a book. And I think the more open-minded we are in those materials, the more we're going to have success in getting people excited about reading. And then lastly, just that emotional, visceral response you get to reading, this feeling of success. If we can tap into that, if we can really get students feeling that positive emotion, it kind of speaks to what Robert said, this idea of it will lead to further muscle memory of reading. So that's really interesting, both of those things. I think on this topic, while we're talking about it, I can see the conversation in the chats really lighting up, and that's really great. And some questions are already being, some comments and some questions are already being formed. My team's going to put up a question to be interactive with the audience, and it's going to pop up on your screen right now. And it's really, what's the biggest obstacle facing your students when it comes to enjoying reading? It's multiple choice. So short attention spans, distractions from social media, lack of interesting and appropriate reading materials, no time for reading, or they're finding reading difficult. We'll give the audience a few moments to answer that. And I know it's already happening. People are sharing things happening in their own individual schools, which is great to see that sharing in the chat. And let's see what the results say. Okay, 47% short attention spans. And then followed by 34% they're finding reading difficult. Robert, that kind of speaks to something you said about, your first point about having the tools. And if you don't have the tools, naturally, as you pointed out, you're not going to engage in reading. So that's really interesting. And I think just maybe something to follow up on that, and I'd love to get both your and Robert and Baron's opinion kind of on that topic. If a student isn't engaged with reading whatsoever, they don't read the news, they don't read books, they get all their information from TikTok or social media, and it's led them to have poor media literacy as they just believe whatever influencers tell them. How can we engage these kinds of students? I'd love to hear from both of you. Feel free, anyone who wants to start the conversation going up on that topic.
I can. I mean, one thing, obviously, using the day, modeling the reading. I mean, one thing that I find really important is just making that reading easy and accessible to them. People don't have time to read; they don't want to read. Make sure it's there for them. You hand it to them, you're giving it them ready. I think Chloe's got some of my displays that I have around my room that she can share, and it's just about having it there for them. So I have a number of different, some of these from the day, but having it there, geography in the news. So it's on I teach geography as well, but it's there on the board. These are all the posters from the day. It links to their everyday experience. It helps them unpick it. We've got the election at the moment, and I've been using the day's election briefings there at the top, just to make sure they have the, it's just a quick, succinct, balanced, unbiased piece of information. There's not a lot of reading. The reading age is appropriate, so we don't have that difficulty understanding it, and it's just there for them. The last poster I've got there is my sort of books, which are linked to some of the topics that we do. And what I try to do is I have them available in the room. If I say to my pupils, we were teaching the almighty dollar to my year 7s, which is the blue book at the bottom right. Does anyone want to borrow it? There's some copies in the head of department's room next door, or you can get it from the library. No one got a copy. The next lesson, I had it in front of me. I said, I've got a copy. Would anyone like to take it? Oh, I'll have it, sir. Make it easy for them. It has to be something they can do quickly, easily. Think about times where are pupils going to get bored? They're sat in the lesson, they're waiting, have books ready. If you're a parent, have books in the back of the car. Have books. I heard one person say they have a basket of books in the bathroom for the kids, but then they can't get the kids out of the bathroom. So that's causes another problem. But just make it easy for them. If the kids in my class are sat staring at the displays on the wall and they're reading something that's improving their media literacy, while they're waiting for the books to be given out or something, then fantastic. Make it really easy, make it quick for them, find where they get bored, normalize reading for pleasure. Make it something that we all do at our school.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. And then I have to ask it to Baron, because on that topic, Robert, I'm getting lots of questions in the chat from Claire and from someone else about this idea of reader refusers, right? So like people who hate reading and they want to know how you can bring in materials. Baron, do you have any kind of succinct takeaways for our audience members? Because it seems to be a theme now. It's coming up, this idea of absolute refusal to read. How would you address
absolutely
that?
Well, look, again, it's there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, but it does take persistence, it does take patience. I mentioned earlier sort of trying to meet them at the point of their interests, and then thinking creatively or flexibly about how you can bring text in. There was something, just going back to one of Robert's suggestions, which I really like as well, that sort of recommending books, having them to hand. I'd go a step further. I mean, I'm a big advocate of reading aloud and reading to young people. We tend to do it for the younger year groups, and then it suddenly falls away. So actually, keeping that the art of storytelling, if you like, alive, and actually doing it as a shared activity. I know buddied reading will be something that crops up. It's quite successful at the school that I work at. You pair a couple of people that maybe have similar reading levels, and they might both be fairly reluctant, but once they get going, they are sharing that experience, and they're likely to be a little bit more patient with each other. Making what they're reading relevant is key. So just again, going back to the day, for example, I'm fortunate in that I get classes for a topic called religion worldviews, which some people have spiral. It's critical thinking effectively. The great thing with some of the articles on the day, one is they're not overly long, but they are succinct. The length of the text does matter, especially with reluctant readers. They're not going, as soon as you put an even slightly large tome in their hands, you might be losing them. So having something where that's digestible, great. Something that then engages with you. So another feature is the questioning that comes at the end of the article. Really clever, because then you know that what's going to happen is there's going to be a conversation afterwards. You've read this thing, and actually, where do we go from here? Well, once we start talking about it, well, now I need to know more. I want to know more. What's related, and then you start following the piece of string. So keeping or trying to find a way to make it a conversation. Don't intimidate with oversized text. Try and find things that you think will fit with their interests. You know, a magazine to tick and flick. Same thing, same idea. I'm not going to suggest that the end goal is that we want people that are just flicking through magazines, but if we can break down that bit of a hoodoo around, how scary a text can be, and you give them bite-sized chunks through storytelling, and read to a class, here's an extract. I think you can start to break the ice. That's been my experience, and we've had some success with that.
That's really great, Baron. And then the million-dollar question following these ideas and these tips is creating that routine. And again, this has come from an audience member of how do we create that sort of frequency across days, across weeks, so that it becomes a lifelong skill, not just as a student, but as they move into adulthood.
I'm happy to come in on that just quickly, just because I've seen one of the comments come up talking about parents, and I as a parent of a young person myself, and seeing how she's developing and knowing how important the time that I spend with her is while we're sharing reading moments. I know it's difficult because some parents just won't have the time or the resources, but it really is a trifecta effect. I mean, you've got the young person themselves, you've got the school or the staff members involved there. If they go home or they go into care and reading stops there, it's always going to be an uphill battle. So for them to have people that they can develop that relationship with, for parents not just to take an interest, but to, and I think Robert mentioned modeling. I actually think modeling is huge. I think modeling is huge. It's such an interesting thing that we talk about how important reading is, and how few of us are reading in front of children. So how often is it the case that a person will come into a library with a class, right, everybody, let's get reading, and I'm going to carry on with marking, planning, something else, showing that we really do think that the 20 minutes that we're going to spend reading is valuable time, is crucial. The same thing happens when you get home. If it is 10 minutes before bed, brilliant, because again, you've established a bit of an emotional connection. We were reading and I felt great. There was that presence, we were together. And I think, that feeling carries on long after some of the other experiences that you might have, might not. So, sorry to be repetitive, but I guess it's when I say success, as I said earlier, success, I don't just mean academic success. I mean that feeling like life is good, we're winning. And there's really special emotional bonds that you can develop. Reading becomes the sort of the environment in which we experience those. So when people want to experience those same things, they go back to reading. And that's how I would go about it. Try and create those moments that are special around reading.
Okay, that's great. Robert,
sorry, just add one thing to that around the modelling. There was some research done around World Book Day, and one of the reasons that people gave young people gave around not liking reading is that they saw us all as hypocrites. Adults were hypocrites because we told them that reading was important, but what do we do when we've got free time? We sit and look at our phones. They said the parents sit and scroll through the phones all the time rather than reading. So if we're telling them it's important, but we're not doing it ourselves, then, what, again, it's all about, are we sending the wrong message to our young people?
Absolutely, absolutely. And here's another question. Again, it's all on the same topic. How can we sort of, I think this is in air quotes, trick students into reading without them even realizing they're reading? I think that's a great way of framing it, this question, because when something's enjoyable, it doesn't feel like work. So do you have any ideas on this question from our audience member? Robert or Baron? I
think it comes back to what we said again. It's about finding what they're interested in. Meet them with their, what are they interested in? I keep coming back to this. My son loves Minecraft, so we found there was some, fan fiction around Minecraft, and he loved reading that. He devoured that, and then we bought him the manuals for it, and he's got 3 of these manuals, and I asked him what he's done at school, and he says he can't remember. but then he will talk to me for an hour at a time about how to make some contraption on Minecraft, you know. Meet them where they are, you know, find something. Everyone's got an interest. If you sit down and go, we're going to read this really important book about, you know, the society of the 17th century aristocracy, of course they're not going to be interested. And we're going, I don't understand why you're not enjoying this book, you know. Another one, again, graphic novels. My son found one on a secondhand bookshelf, a Ben 10 comic, and he must have read that 10 times. So then I said, well, do you want the next one? And he saved up his pocket money and he bought the next one and the next one, and he's collecting these now. So it's about what's interesting them. So it's about finding what their interests are. There will be something, you know, that fits their interests. Finding what their interests are, finding something that's age appropriate. They will be lazy if you give them the chance to. They will, you know, I had a reading class last year, and what book are we reading? And you've got the child there, and he's got a reading age of 16, and he's reading Diary of the Wimpy Kid. And you're like, well, it's good that you're reading, but what could we read next? You know, we finished that. You know, when we finish this one, you're enjoying it. That's great. What should we read next? And it's encouraging them, talking about it, make it, and it's, you can build a whole school community around anything, you know, if just encourage your staff to be having these conversations constantly around reading, you know, and it shouldn't be onerous. It shouldn't be something we're forcing them to do. We shouldn't have to, I mean, we are tricking them, I guess, but, you know, it's encouraging them. It's about finding them, you know, why do we love reading? You know, think about yourself and your own experiences. What do you like to read? If someone made you read something, would you enjoy it as much as if you picked it yourself? And these are quite obvious questions, aren't they? But we sometimes, you know, especially when, you know, we have systems in place in school, and schools have bought into reading programs, and we're funneling children down very narrow pathways. If you've got a library in your school, you know, I'm lucky to have a library, and we've got a librarian. Not every school has a library. You've got to find them the opportunities. You've got to find them things they're interested in, and these all things link in, and, you know, try and have those conversations with parents. It can be quite difficult, you know. Talk to them about the importance of reading at a very young age. Read to your children every night. Let them read to you. We're not testing them, though. We're not tricking them or catching them out. We're reinforcing that it is just for the love of doing it, and hopefully the rest will come.
No, that's really great. I think there's something you said, Robert, that's really interesting. It's the idea of, we can't assume that a student knows what inspires them yet. Like it's down to the educator, the teacher, the librarian, such as Baron, to kind of help them find that thing that lights them up, that leads them to reading, that leads them to reading more. And I think that's something, yeah, we'll all be thinking about. How do we inspire students to think about the things that inspire them, whatever they might be? I can't believe how fast we've gone through everything. There's been so much that's been shared, Robert and Baron. It's just been fantastic. And now I see why we had a sequel. We have some more than a few useful takeaways that you both have shared. So a really big thank you to you, but also a really big thank you to the teachers, librarians, and all those interested in the topic of reading for attending, and for the chat that's ongoing right now. It's really great to see you all talking, sharing ideas with us, with each other. That's the whole point of this webinar. Just another reminder that your CPD certificate and recording will be sent out tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that in your inbox. What our team are going to do right now is put up a link in the chat where teachers can sign up for a free trial of the day, or book a consultation with a member of the team here at the day, who can demonstrate how to use our resources in lessons, both in the classroom and also in the library, but also in the home. So we really encourage students to be reading with their siblings, with their parents, and to continue that conversation outside of school. We have something very exciting to share. We're extending an offer to attendees of the webinar today to get the rest of the summer for free when you sign up for the day before July 19th, just in time for our summer reading challenge. Now, this is brand new, so let me tell you what the summer reading challenge is. For 30 days, we'll be publishing a new international news story with clues in each article. And at the end of the challenge, students will put together their answers in a passport worksheet and submit it to the day for their chance to win a £100 Amazon voucher. So more details will be in the chat right now, as well as that link to become a member of the day. So we have a lot of exciting things happening this summer at the day as we head into summer holidays. So keep an eye out for that. Again, thanks for joining today's session. Robert and Baron, it's been really incredible. Hope to see you again, maybe for the trilogy, and see you all at our next webinar, which we'll announce soon. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us.